Remember growing up watching sitcoms where these young broke 20-somethings lived in glamorous apartments and managed to eat out every other day? I do too. Which is why I felt a little bit jaded when I first started apartment hunting and realized that the places within my budget were much less chic. The building I finally settled on was older than my grandparents and still overpriced, but the freedom of having my own place to live, that I hardly minded. I managed to spruce up the place, first by throwing every cleaning product I could afford into every nook and cranny. Then, with my meager budget, I found a few cool older pieces of furniture and art at Goodwill and garage sales and went full on Pinterest DIY at decorating my new home. At the end of the day, it still wasn't the movie set of a rom-com about a spunky young girl making her way into the real world, but it did feel a lot more like home. Even though I had moved to the city, my suburban sense of neighborliness was instinctual, so not long after settling in, I found myself wanting to reach out to those who shared my floor. My mother always taught me that baked goods were the best way to make a new friend, so I pulled out my Betty Crocker cookbook and set to whipping up a batch of ooey gooey chocolate chip cookies. After coating my newly cleaned kitchen and myself in flour, I had 3 batches of cookies, one for each apartment on my floor. I cleaned myself up and took my first batch to the place right next to mine, Apartment C. I had barely tapped on the rotting door, rust making the use of the knocker impossible, when it swung open quickly. I had to look down to see who stood in the opening. The old woman was tiny, the top of her head barely coming up to my breasts. Her snow-white hair was curled into elegant but dry and frizzy curls. She wore a floral housecoat that looked far too thick for the warmth of spring creeping through the hallways. Hello? Her voice crackled like a bonfire as she spoke. Who are you? Hi there. I put on my best pageant smile and held up the tray of cookies, determined to win over my new neighbor. I just moved in next door and I thought I'd come introduce myself. The woman stared at me, her expression unreadable. My smile was unwavering as I held up the cookies. I'm Molly. I reached out a hand to shake. Molly? She parroted back at me. Yes, and I brought you cookies. My voice was coated with sugar, sweeter than the cookies, hoping to warm her up. I guess no one had come to see her in quite a while. She seemed confused, and even though I'd found her in her own apartment, she was lost. What's your name? Agnes. Her voice was so soft and gravelly, it almost sounded like a rusty door hinge opening. Hi, Agnes. It's a pleasure to meet you. I lifted the foil off the cookies, the smell of chocolate and vanilla wafting off them. I hope you enjoy chocolate chip. Her lips spread into a hesitant smile, the skin around her lips cracking as she did so. She reached out and took the plate of cookies before abruptly shutting the door. The whole interaction struck me as odd, and it wasn't just the woman's demeanor. Something just felt wrong. I opted to go home instead of visiting my other neighbors, just wanting to be alone. I don't know why I felt so off-put. Sure, Agnes was strange, but usually nothing could make my friendliness and extroverted nature waver. Back inside my apartment, I felt much more comfortable, lighter. I spent the rest of the evening relaxing. I took a nice long bath, soaking in Epsom salts and peppermint oils. Afterwards, I wrapped myself in a fluffy robe and snuck a few cookies off the other neighbors' plates as I flipped through the channels. As I snuggled into the cushions of my cheap couch, one of the only new things in the apartment, I settled on a rom-com I'd seen a few times before. I couldn't hear the dialogue through the music coming from next door. A loud waltz played through the wall. I tried turning up the TV, but I just couldn't tune out the music. Eventually, irritated, I decided to head next door. I plastered my award-winning smile yet again and walked into the hallway. The music was so loud that the knocker on Agnes's was shaking. I nervously lifted a fist to knock on the door when it stopped. Silence rung heavily in my ears, louder than the music had been. Although irritated, the cause of my frustration was gone, and I no longer had a reason to complain. The next day I decided to stop by to see my other neighbors. Taking my tin-foiled covered plates, I knocked on the door of apartment A, but no one was home. Heading over to apartment B, I met Roger. Roger was in his late 20s and well put together in a cardigan and pressed slacks. He invited me in for coffee and we shared the cookies. "It's nice to finally have another person living on this floor," he mused, pouring the coffee. "It can get a little lonely here." "The other neighbors aren't very social?" I asked, accepting a mug. "What other neighbors?" he laughed. "Cream or sugar?" "Yes, please, to both." I nodded and he turned to the cupboard. "Well, I haven't met whoever lives in A, but I brought cookies to Agnes." "Agnes?" Roger raised an eyebrow, setting down the cream and sugar and taking a seat. "Yeah, the little old lady in apartment C? I supposed that she kept to herself and that he'd maybe never seen her. She certainly looked like she never stepped outside." "Nobody lives in C," he furrowed his brow. "You and I are the only two on this floor." "Maybe she just moved in," I pondered. "Or perhaps she just rarely goes outside and you've missed her? She certainly did seem like a shut-in." Roger's brow furrowed deeper, his demeanor changing from friendly to concerned. "Molly, I'm not sure who you met," he shook his head. "My brother-in-law Jason owns the building. He bought it cheap because of all the renovations that it needed. The entire floor and part of the second was damaged by a fire. It wasn't livable. Jason has been having it fixed, but this apartment was only finished 6 months ago, and yours he finished last week. He didn't even have time to clean the place before you applied for it." "Well, then maybe he's just finished apartment C and Agnes moved in." I took a sip of my coffee. My explanation seemed thoroughly logical. "No," Roger shook his head again. "He's starting A this week, but it will be a while before he gets to C. That's where the fire started. It's going to take months to repair and replace everything in there." "Well then, who did I see?" I asked, growing concerned. "There was a woman who answered the door." "Most likely a squatter," he shrugged, although I could tell that he too was unnerved. "I'll call Jason tonight and have him check it out." I agreed with Roger that his plan was solid, although I wasn't exactly comfortable with living next to a squatter. I'd only lived in the city for a week. I really wasn't ready for that. "So I suppose you thought I was the one playing the music so loudly last night," I laughed. "I'm surprised you're being so kind, assuming I caused such a nuisance." Roger tilted his head to the side slightly, his features wrinkled in confusion. "What music?" I laughed, assuming that he was messing with me, but his expression remained. "You know, the waltz that was playing last night. You have to have heard it." "No, I didn't hear a peep," he shook his head. I didn't press the matter. Maybe he had an odd sense of humor. Maybe his walls were thicker than mine. Not wanting to overstay my welcome, I thanked him for the coffee and made my farewell. He was polite in his goodbye, telling me to stop by whenever I liked. He was nice and cute. And I found myself thinking that I may just have to do that and maybe give him my number as well. Back in my place, I sat down at my computer and opened up Facebook. Roger had introduced himself with his full name, and I figured that I might be able to do a little snooping to see if he had a girlfriend or whatever. I searched for a while, scrolling through page after page of Rogers with similar last names. As I was about to give up, I remembered that he was related to the landlord. If I could find him, then surely I'd be able to find Roger. He popped up straight away. It even looked like we had a few mutual friends, which wasn't surprising. The building is close to the college I attended. Jason's page didn't list him as married, which I found odd, but guess that maybe Roger used brother-in-law as a catch-all term for guy my sister is dating. I scrolled through pictures looking for a girlfriend that would link him to Roger. I found vacation photos, family reunion pics, etc., but no girlfriend. As I clicked through an album, I reached a photo of Jason all dressed up next to an older woman in a housecoat. Agnes. Her grin was the same as it had been the other day, her dark eyes looking right through me. I didn't know what came over me, but I had to show Roger. Grabbing my phone, I snapped a picture of the screen and ran into the hallway in my pajamas. I marched right to his door and knocked as loudly as my shaking hands would allow. The door creaked open, and I expected to see Roger standing there looking at me like a crazy person. Except he wasn't there. No one was. I pushed the door open a bit further, looking inside. The apartment was empty. The table I had sat at only a few hours earlier was gone. The tastefully decorated living room, barren. I'm sitting on my apartment floor as I write this, shaking. I turned around almost immediately after seeing what I saw in Roger's apartment. As I rushed down the hallway, Agnes stuck her head out of her door to smile at me and wink. I don't know what any of this means or what's even real. All I know is that I've locked the door and put on earplugs playing the loudest music I could find, but I still can't drown out that waltz.